Hi there, this is Andy from Blessed Man Meditations. Recently, Alex O'Connor from Cosmic Skeptic posted a video containing about 40 arguments for atheism. I have no personal vindictive vendetta against Alex or against any other atheist. I love Alex, and I love all atheists as my fellow people, all created in God's image. But I believe their epistemology is wrong and needs to be responded to. This video will be part of a lengthy series I plan to do in response to each argument Alex makes. So please like this video, comment, and please subscribe. I hope you have a blessed rest of your day.
A new, fast-growing Christian YouTube channel, Redeemed Zoomer, put out a video promisingly called All Atheist Arguments Answered in 10 Minutes. Let's see how he does.
At Blessed Man Meditations, we defend the faith that has once for all been delivered to the saints. Today we examine the relationship between prosperity and atheism in response to one of the arguments made for atheism by Alex O'Connor in his video, Every Argument for Atheism. To recap how the Alex O'Connor video went, the atheist in the video says, atheist countries are more prosperous. The Christian responds and says that while that is true, correlation does not necessarily equal causation. The Christian says in the video that it is not that atheism causes prosperity, it is that prosperity causes atheism, because when people have comfortable lives, they do not feel the need to depend on God. Countries that are currently prosperous, atheist countries, are rooted in Protestant Christianity. An example of a country that is prosperous and not rooted in Christianity is communist China. Alex responds and says he does not know how one can measure a nation's prosperity without presupposing a bunch of worldview assumptions. And I think I talk a little bit about that in this response to Alex. Alex says it's also impossible to say how much a country's prior religion is relevant to its current religion and prosperity level. Alex says even if religious societies are more prosperous, this only tells us that belief in God is socially beneficial, not that God actually exists. In my response here to Alex, I'd like to point out that the point that the atheist in the Redeemed Zoomer video appears to make the point that it is the connection that economic prosperity is good, and economic prosperity is more connected with atheism than theism. That appears to be the atheistic claim made in the video, that economic prosperity is good and it is more connected with atheism than theism. But to respond, I'd like to ask, because something is economically beneficial, does that automatically mean that the economically beneficial thing is objectively good? I could give you an example. It's an extreme example, but I believe it illustrates the point. If someone offered you $1 billion to cut both your eyes out, that would be economically beneficial, but would it be good? Hopefully most people wouldn't consider that to be good. It reminds me of the old Living Waters evangelism videos in which Ray Comfort said, if I offered you $1 million to cut out both your eyes, would you do it? And almost without fail, everyone said no. To continue, if someone offered you $1 billion in exchange to leave your loved ones, would you leave your loved ones? It would be economically beneficial to receive $1 billion, but would it be good for you to leave your loved ones? Would your loved ones think it was good for you to leave them for the sake of money? Again, hopefully you wouldn't consider that to be good. In addition, to give something the objective value of good requires an atheist to borrow from a theist's worldview. That requires the existence of objective morality, and the theist has resources available to them that the atheist does not have to ground objective morality. Like I said, the theist has an objective framework on which to base moral values and duties. The atheist lacks such an objective framework. The atheistic standard for grounding objective moral values and duties is a forever moving target that will never be settled, because the standard of morality is frequently changing as we continue to evolve and we continue to progress further along the scientific continuum. The theistic standard for objective morality and objective moral values has its foundation in God, the ultimate lawgiver. From here, I expect many atheists listening to this to retort and say that the morality of the God of the Bible, for instance, deserves to be questioned. And I don't shy away from those questions, but those questions have been answered elsewhere on this channel and by others. I and other theists have answered many of those moral objections to the God of the Bible, so it's not going to happen in this reply. I'm not trying to avoid anything. It's just that I've already covered this ground elsewhere. Because the atheist has no objective grounding for basing their qualitative judgments for what is good or bad, the atheist's definition for what is good is in constant flux. Because of the fluid nature of the atheist's definition of good, their definition of good cannot be considered reliable. Nevertheless, qualitative terms such as good and bad are terms that both atheists and theists use. So, I'm going to continue to use them too. My use of the terms good and bad are objectively grounded in God's nature. My point that may seem to some to be unrelated to the point raised by Alex in this video is the following. It does not have to follow that material prosperity is always a good thing. There are times when material prosperity is not always better for society. Perhaps my line of argumentation lines up with Alex when he alludes to presupposing one's worldview assumptions can affect our conclusions when we examine the relationship between national economic prosperity and national worldview. When he said in his statement about making a whole bunch of worldview assumptions, or maybe he didn't use the words a whole bunch of, but he did talk about making worldview assumptions. And it is my worldview assumptions that lead me to the conclusion that economic prosperity is not always a good thing. But isn't this true for all of us, whether we are theists or not? Isn't it true that our worldview affects how we view the world and the conclusions we draw from our observations that we make when we view the world? To support my points, let's look at a study of the relationship between affluence and entitlement and narcissism, and make an important connection to the issue at hand. So at this link, you will find this psychological scientific study. And on the site, the link shows one study which suggests that accumulating wealth or prosperity can intensify someone's sense of entitlement and lead them to become narcissistic. One quote from the study says that, quote, people with more money tend to have an increased sense of self-importance and inflated self-esteem. They often feel that they're entitled to more positive experiences than others, which can lead to feelings of superiority and grandiosity. So the implication that I drew, that I'd like you to draw, is that people would view that as a bad thing, having the increased sense of self-importance and the inflated self-esteem, the inflated ego, the superabundance of pride, the boasting that causes you to look down on other people because you feel superior to them, because you have a grandiose ego because of your pride. that was linked to the acquisition of more material resources. Hopefully, whether theist or atheist, we can agree that that sort of attitude towards other people is a bad thing, objectively bad, whether you're theist or atheist. The study quotes again, there's something about wealth that gives rise to a sense of entitlement. The belief that one deserves more good things in life than others can create a domino effect, leading to an increased or inflated sense of self-importance, vanity, grandiosity, and omnipotence. Right. Because you have more money, you think you can run to the front of the line and get your needs met before other less important people, or let's not call them needs, let's call them wants. If you are financially prosperous, for example, you can have an entire theme park shut down and the middle-class public can be shut out while you get to enjoy it by yourself with your family. While you can argue, someone could argue that that might be good for the safety of that celebrity's family, it also could be argued that that comes from a sense of entitlement, that they deserve to have that type of treatment exercised upon them. The study goes on. The relationship between wealth and narcissistic traits was not just limited to individuals' own perception of themselves. People with more money also tended to display more dominant and selfish behavior toward others, reflecting their sense of entitlement. Right. The narcissistic can be selfish and finds no problem with their narcissism. In fact, they might find a problem with you or I failing to prop them up in their narcissism. The study goes on. Individuals from higher social classes tended to display a stronger sense of entitlement than their lower class counterparts. This group of people were more likely to believe they deserved special treatment and were entitled to a more privileged lifestyle. The researcher conducted multiple experiments, and the multiple experiments led to the conclusion that upper-class individuals had higher levels of entitlement compared to lower-class individuals. A final experiment conducted by the researcher in the study demonstrated that exposing these individuals who exhibit narcissistic traits to egalitarian values led to a reduction in their sense of entitlement and consequently decreased their levels of narcissism. Yes, hopefully repeated exposure to people who are less fortunate would cause more compassion and less narcissism. Taken together, these experiments provide insight into how wealth and privilege can shape an individual's sense of entitlement and lead to narcissistic behaviors. These findings underscore the importance of cultivating empathy, humility, and self-awareness to mitigate the negative impacts of social class on one's personality and attitudes. Of course, there are exceptions to this general rule. As with general trends, there are exceptions. The study found that simple interventions can reduce narcissism among the wealthy, indicating that their sense of entitlement and self-importance is not innate or unchangeable. Well, that's encouraging. If the financially wealthy can take measures by being generous, then that can help them treat their prosperity in a better way. Those of us in the West, whether we realize it or not, most of us would be considered prosperous, especially if we compare ourselves with those in third world countries, less developed countries, less industrialized countries. Sure, those of us in the West can compare ourselves against others in the West, and we can give ourselves the impression that we are not as prosperous as we would like to be. But it just depends on who you're comparing yourself to. Wealthier participants who think about the benefits of others, of treating others as equals, reduce their levels of narcissism, highlighting the impact of egalitarian values. These findings suggest that interventions that promote empathy and social awareness can mitigate the negative consequences of wealth and privilege. Notably, individuals from higher social classes were more likely to cheat, lie, and display unethical behavior in gambling, driving, and workplace situations. These findings suggest that the negative effects of wealth extend beyond personality traits and impact behaviors that have significant social implications. All that was the study. The purpose of my citing that study was to show that it does not always follow that material prosperity is a good thing. The purpose of my citing that study was to show that material prosperity in that study led to behaviors that most, whether a theist or not, whether people are theists or not, most people would call those behaviors bad. My point is not to say that material prosperity and atheism are always connected. That's not my point. There are bound to be atheists on the lower end of the socioeconomic status relative to one's culture. In fact, each of us can probably think of religious societies in the West that we would inarguably connect with material prosperity. Likewise, each of us can probably think of religious societies in the West that are materially prosperous that we would consider bad examples of theism. So just because you're prosperous doesn't mean you're going to be an atheist. And just because you're prosperous doesn't mean that that's bad. The point is that there is a link between prosperity and pride and entitlement. And pride and entitlement is bad. Compared to less industrialized societies, most of us should be able to agree that if we have the means to listen to videos like this, we have achieved the level of material prosperity that is foreign to the majority of the world, or just insulated from that part of the world. The point I'm driving at is that prosperity many times leads to self-reliance. Self-reliance leads to less awareness of God. Less awareness of God leads to less need for God. Less need for God leads to more searching for reasons to exclude God. More searching for reasons to exclude God leads to finding more reasons to exclude God. Finding more reasons to exclude God leads to more people adopting atheism. It does not necessarily mean that atheism is true. It just means that more people adopt it. The result of atheism, therefore, got launched because of the root of prosperity in those instances, in the argument, specifically in the argument that I'm making. My point is not to say that theists cannot be wealthy or affluent. Theists can be wealthy or affluent. My point is not to say that atheists cannot be impoverished. Atheists can be impoverished. Both atheists and theists can be wealthy and affluent. Both atheists and theists, whether wealthy and affluent or not, can live moral lives. My point is to say that the link between prosperity and atheism is not a surprise to see. My point is also to point out that it is not always beneficial to be more materially prosperous. I think I've made that point clear. My point is not to say that the material prosperity is always bad. Many of the things we enjoy in this life, such as food, relationships, and material prosperity, are not good or bad by themselves. What's good or bad about those things is how we choose to use or misuse the resources we've been given. Many theists and atheists can find agreement on what is good and bad. Oftentimes, a disagreement comes on how to ground what's good and bad. There does not appear to be anything objective on which to ground what is good on atheism. Many atheists will use terms that are difficult to define or that people will define differently. Reference was made to the point that many prosperous countries are rooted in Protestant Christianity. This is not surprising, since for the past 2,000 years, Christians have been spreading the gospel around the globe. So there should be Protestant Christian influence almost everywhere based on that historical fact, that the Christian movement has been around, whether or not a country is economically prosperous or not. Since the gospel's been being spread for 2,000 years, it shouldn't be surprising that no matter where you go, there's Christian influence. I also mean to say that prosperity doesn't have to be the result of Christian influence. Belief in God doesn't have to result in financial windfall. Neither does atheistic belief have to result in material gain. Christians should acknowledge that God gives the ability for one to accrue wealth. Christians should also acknowledge that God rewards diligence many times with the expansion of wealth. There are definitely exceptions to this principle. There are many factors that affect whether or not one ends up wealthy. And of course, wealthy is defined differently by different people. I don't think linking one's subjectively defined level of prosperity to their worldview is probably the best use of time. Alex only responded to the issue raised by Redeemed Zoomer's video. So the issue about whether or not Christianity or atheism is true is better addressed by taking up topics other than prosperity. There's a lot of teaching that calls itself Christian that makes a big deal about prosperity. I refer here to the prosperity gospel. I personally do not adhere to the prosperity gospel and consider it to be false teaching rather than Christian. As I've already said earlier in this video, not agreeing with the prosperity gospel is not the same thing as saying Christians can't or shouldn't ever be wealthy in an earthly sense. God knows and allows how much earthly wealth to permit someone to use during their time on earth. God also lets people of all different beliefs use wealth. God also lets people of all different beliefs be more impoverished. It's up to Him. We do have the responsibility to be diligent and wise with our use of time and resources. The Christian would say that Christianity has, as one necessary component, humility. The purpose of the study about prosperity was to show that prosperity and humility are antithetical oftentimes. Therefore, because of the relationship between prosperity and humility, which is oftentimes antithetical, prosperity has more in common with atheism than it does with theism or Christianity, because the Christian virtue is humility. Can atheists be humble? Of course they can. Just speaking in general principles. There are many things that could be said about this issue. But as Alex didn't say as much as he probably could have, I think it's best to end this video at this point as well for me. So thank you for watching. Please like, comment, and subscribe. And have a blessed rest of your day. I see the